Big news just broke. The Chicago Bears have officially hired Ben Johnson as their next head coach. For the Las Vegas Raiders, this is a huge blow. In my opinion, Ben Johnson was the best head coach candidate available this year. Not only that, but I believe he's going to be one of the greats in the future. Most of us were hoping the Raiders would land him, so this stings a lot. Ben Johnson had the potential to turn the Raiders into a winning team, and now that chance is gone. The Raiders are going to have to start looking elsewhere for a new head coach. We'll dive into some candidates I think could be a good fit for the Raiders toward the end of this video, but for now, let's talk about what this means for the team. Over the past week, several insiders and media reports had been hinting that Ben Johnson was strongly considering the Raiders. There were even rumors that he might have leaned toward taking the job. Some reports suggested that he had taken the interview and was actually excited about the possibility. But then we heard from Adam Schefter, who pointed out that there was still some uncertainty. He made it clear that Johnson wasn't fully sold on the Raiders' job, and he was right. Just 2 days after the Detroit Lions were eliminated by the Washington Commanders, Ben Johnson made his move, straight to the Chicago Bears. To me, the Bears' decision to hire Ben Johnson makes perfect sense. They have a quarterback with huge potential, a solid offensive line, and some strong weapons on offense. The key to success in the NFL is having a good quarterback, and the Bears have that in place. They've got a young QB who's entering his second year, and some people are calling him a generational talent. That's a huge advantage. Of course, even the best quarterbacks need a great offensive coordinator. No matter how talented a quarterback is, they need someone who can guide them and call the right plays. I truly believe that even someone like Patrick Mahomes would struggle if he didn't have the right play caller. That's where Ben Johnson comes in. As head coach, he'll also be the play caller, which is exactly what the Bears need right now. This hire is a big win for them, no matter how you look at it. Now, I thought the Raiders had a shot at landing Ben Johnson, especially if they could sell him on the idea of a strong defensive line. The Raiders have some young defensive linemen who could have been a big draw, and I honestly believe their defensive line is better than the Bears. But Chicago still has some strong defensive players too. Guys like Devon Dexter, a solid defensive tackle, and Montez Sweat, who's been impressive, are good building blocks for their defense. Plus, they have Austin Booker, a rookie from last year who has a ton of potential. Not many people know about him yet, but he's an elite pass rusher, kind of like Max Crosby with his own unique style. He came out of Kansas as a 4th or 5th round pick, but he's been impressive. Despite all of this, the Raiders couldn't land Ben Johnson. It's a tough loss. So, Ben Johnson is headed to the Chicago Bears, and that's interesting for a few reasons. First off, the Bears already have a general manager in place, Ryan Poles, who's been there for a few years now. We had heard that for Ben Johnson to come to the Raiders, a big part of the deal would be firing Tom Telesco. But honestly, firing Telesco right now doesn't really make sense to me. Over the past 15 years, the Raiders have gone through a lot of general managers. There was Reggie McKenzie, who had some hits and misses. He drafted guys like Carl Joseph and Garyon Conley, solid players but not quite living up to their first-round potential. Then we saw the John Gruden and Mike Mayock era, followed by the Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels period, and most recently, Tom Telesco. Looking back, you could argue that Telesco's first year was actually a strong one. His 2024 draft is looking pretty solid, similar to the memorable 2014 draft where the Raiders landed both Khalil Mack and Derek Carr. In fact, you could even say that, over a 15-year span, the Raiders might have had their best draft in that 1 year under Telesco. So, getting rid of him now doesn't seem to add up. Meanwhile, the Bears are in a different position. They have a really solid general manager in Ryan Poles, who started his rebuild in 2021. Since then, he's been making all the right moves, and the team is looking good. They landed their quarterback in the 2024 draft and have revamped the roster into a competitive squad. They just needed a coach to come in and put it all together, and Ben Johnson is the perfect fit for that role. Again, we were told by several insiders that for Ben Johnson to join the Raiders, a fresh start with a new general manager would be key. But after seeing what the Bears have built, it's clear that they're in a much better position right now. At this point, it's time to look ahead. Whoever the Raiders hire as their next general manager, we need someone who can make smart decisions and build a solid roster. The question is, are we going to find someone like Tom Telesco, who had a great draft last year? Or are we going to end up with another GM like Dave Ziegler, who struggled to evaluate defensive linemen? Look at some of the choices made under Ziegler. We passed on Jalen Carter and took players like Tyree Wilson, who, honestly, didn't look great on tape in college. We also drafted Byron Young, who didn't even last a full season with the Raiders. And there were other defensive tackles, like Kobe Turner and Devin Annan, who turned out to be better picks. It's hard to understand how we ended up with someone like Young when his college tape wasn't impressive at all. But hey, moving forward, the Raiders need to get this right. We need a general manager who can evaluate talent properly, someone with strong connections, and a good eye for potential. Maybe we even look at moving up in the draft to grab a quarterback who can make an impact. On top of that, the Raiders have to figure out who their next head coach will be. One name that stands out to me is Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Dave Canales. He's had a really solid year, and I think he could be a great fit for the Raiders. We haven't brought him in for an interview yet, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. Dave Canales has done a great job with the Buccaneers, and some people think he's ready to take on a head coaching role in the NFL. He could be a fantastic fit for the Raiders, but he's not the only name that stands out. Another option could be Cliff Kingsbury. He's been phenomenal working with Jaden Daniels, and it's crazy to think that the Raiders almost hired him. If we had brought in Kingsbury as our offensive coordinator, I'm convinced this season would have been completely different for the Raiders. Imagine if Kingsbury had been in charge of the offense, whether it was Garoppolo, Aiden O'Connell, or whoever ended up winning the quarterback spot. Our offense would have been much more efficient, and I believe we would have won more games. The difference a great play caller can make is huge, and that's exactly why I've been so critical of guys like Josh McDaniels and his offensive staff. You all know I've been hard on someone like Mick Lombardi, and I wasn't shy about calling it early in the season. I said Antonio Pierce's success would rely heavily on the offensive coordinator, and unfortunately, Mick Lombardi didn't get the job done. Not only did he get fired, but Antonio Pierce ended up losing his job too. That just shows how important it is to hire the right people in the right positions. Looking ahead, the Raiders really need to figure things out. If they decide to go with someone like Liam Cohen or even Cliff Kingsbury as head coach, they'll need to make sure they also hire a solid defensive coordinator. It looks like the Raiders might be leaning toward someone like Pete Carroll for that defensive side of the ball. Pete Carroll could be the Raiders' number 2 option, and if they go that route, they'll have a strong defensive mind in place. If the Raiders decide to go the Pete Carroll route, they'll need to find an offensive coordinator who can deliver results. One name to keep in mind is Shane Waldron. He worked with Carroll for about 3 years before Pete was let go. While the Seahawks might say he was promoted or moved to another role, we all know the truth. He was fired. Pete Carroll is looking to get back into coaching, and he could be a solid option for the Raiders as a head coach. There are definitely options out there for the Raiders, but it's crucial they hire someone who has proven themselves on their side of the football. Take Pete Carroll, for example. He's already proven himself as a successful head coach. Then there's Liam Cohen, who's been solid calling plays, and Cliff Kingsbury, who may not have worked out as a head coach, but his offensive schemes have always been strong. When you have a coach who can call plays effectively on offense, you give your team a chance to succeed, especially if you bring in the right defensive coordinator. Another name to watch is Kellen Moore, the current offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. While some think Moore could head to the Dallas Cowboys, his future is still up in the air. No matter what, he's a top-tier candidate. Lastly, Mike McCarthy is someone I'd absolutely consider if I were the Raiders. He's had success wherever he's been, even though his recent stint with the Cowboys hasn't been perfect. McCarthy may not have won a Super Bowl lately, but he knows how to run a successful NFL offense, and that could be a huge asset for the Raiders. Here's the revised version of the 7th section, making it more engaging and concise. I think Mike McCarthy is the kind of coach who can really get the most out of a quarterback. Personally, I don't think Dak Prescott is as good as some people make him out to be. Mike McCarthy definitely made Prescott better than he actually is. Don't get me wrong, Prescott is a decent quarterback, but if he's making $20 million a year, that's reasonable. At $60 million? Not so much. Now, the Raiders have to figure things out. It's tough that Ben Johnson is heading to the Bears, but we've got to shift our focus. We need to figure out who the next head coach and general manager will be, and then bring in the right coordinators to complete the puzzle. The firing of Tom Telesco doesn't make much sense to me right now, and I'll continue to question that decision until we see how it plays out. That said, Mark Davis has put his trust in Tom Brady, so we'll see if Brady can build a winner for the Raiders. If Brady's vision pans out, it could be a game-changer for the team. I'll keep critiquing decisions I don't agree with, and Telesco's firing will definitely be one of those, but at the end of the day, we all just want to see the right moves being made. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.